Okay, folks, welcome to another online session of PHI 215. I hope everybody's doing well out there. And today we're going to do a two-parter, and we're going to finish up our unit that's been getting us familiar with some of the different views we might hold in philosophy of mind. So we're going to look at two views today. And this is going to be a two-part video. So this first video is just going to cover our first topic, property dualism. And then the second part, which you'll find along with this video, is going to cover a view called panpsychism. So let's get to work. So yeah, the plan today, we're going to look at property dualism. So we're going to think about how it compares to other theories of mind, and we're going to think about some of the strengths and weaknesses of property dualism. And then in our second video, we're going to get a grip on what panpsychists think and what some of the strengths and weaknesses of their theory happen to be. So, just to review, we'll notice that there are problems with the other theories in philosophy of mind that we've already looked at. So substance dualism, remember substance dualism is the view that minds are one kind of thing and material bodies are another kind of thing, and that these things can exist independently of one another. So that was Descartes' view. But the problem that emerged with that view is that it might be kind of hard to see how an immaterial substance that could interact causally with the physical world. It seems pretty obvious how two physical things could interact, but how could a non-physical thing interact with a physical thing? So the way we might put it is it's like puzzling and improbable to understand how these two things could affect one another. We then get a theory called mind-brain identity. So this was J.J.C. Smart's view. Basically, a certain electrical impulse is identical to thought. But we ran into some problems with that argument, which said, basically, it doesn't seem to make sense to say that states of the brain are the same things as thoughts. So we got Chalmers's conceivability argument, where we thought about the conceivability of zombies, and we also had a look at Nagel's knowledge argument. It seems like you can know all the physical facts about a bat, but you might still not know what it's like to be a bat. And if that's right, then what it's like to be a bat is not a physical fact about them. So that tells against the view that the mind is identical to certain physical states of the brain. And then last time around, we looked at functionalism. Functionalism claims that having a mind is a matter of having certain capabilities for functional organization, or we might even say realizing those capabilities for functional organization. But we also noticed that certain cases, such as Bloch's Chinese brain thought experiment and Searle's Chinese room thought experiment, remember, just try to keep track of those, even though they both mention Chinese things. In the Chinese brain example, it's about every person in the nation using a two-way radio to control a body. But Bloch points out, it doesn't seem to have that thing that makes something thought. There's no qualitative experience with the function. And Searle's Chinese room argument points out that even if we could make a machine that passes the Turing test, where you put Chinese symbols in on one side and coherent answers are output on the other side by following a very complicated, large rulebook, Searle thinks that that's not what thinking is. There's no understanding going on, right? It understands the syntax well enough to give coherent responses, but it doesn't have understanding or understanding of semantics rather than syntax. So these cases, the Chinese brain and the Chinese room, were raised as apparent counterexamples to the functionalist theory. So today we're going to look at property dualism. So this is the view that mental properties are non-physical properties arising from, but not reducible to, physical properties. So having thought might arise from having certain brain states, but it is not reducible to or identical to those brain states. So here's what David Chalmers tells us. He says that conscious experience involves properties of an individual that are not entailed by physical properties. Now remember, Chalmers also advanced the zombie argument. So he said, just having a brain in a certain setup does not entail that there is also conscious experience. Actually, I think I've got a little typo here, so let's fix that up. I just repeated some words when I copied this down. Of an individual, right? That are not entailed by the physical properties, although they may depend lawfully on those properties. So there may be lawful dependencies of, say, certain brain states to there being certain thoughts, right? So you might need a certain setup or machinery in your brain in order to have the experience of pain. But the way that Chalmers thinks about it is that consciousness is a feature of the world over and above the world's physical features. So the way that Chalmers is thinking about this is that all the things in the world might be made of physical things, but not all the properties of those things are physical properties. So the thought here is that the reason why you can't observe the mental properties of certain things is that science can only tell us about the physical properties of a thing, right? Like that's what scientists do when they try to understand all the physical properties of a bat's brain, right? But it might be that there are further mental properties that exist over and above those physical properties, which are real. They're just importantly distinct. So that's the idea that the property dualist has, right? So they aren't like substance dualists who think that we've got two completely independent kinds of things that mysteriously interact. There is at least a lawful dependence that exists between mental properties and the way that they depend on the physical world. It's just that they aren't, at the root of it, fundamentally the same thing, right? Mental properties are themselves not physical properties. You might think that there could be other analogies that could be drawn here. So I could give you a complete physical description of a dog, right? But we might also say that like some of its moral properties, so like it's the property of the dog being a good boy, or the property of the fact that the dog deserves not to be kicked, might be something that depends on the dog's existing in the physical world, and on its being capable of having certain experiences, for it having the right not to be kicked. But those moral properties of the dogs might not be the same thing as its physical properties. So try to think about that analogy. Anyways, if you're a property dualist, you're basically going to say, look, the world is full of physical things with physical properties, and these physical properties of things give rise to mental properties. So that's what this arrow is doing here. So we might have like a brain state here on this P1, which gives rise to a mental state. Something like pain, right? It's a brain state, mental state, physical state, mental. So we might ask property dualists like Chalmers, how do mental properties and physical properties interact? So one way you might go on this view is to be an epiphenomenalist, right? So an epiphenomenalist, and we've already encountered this term, is someone who thinks that mental properties never cause any physical properties, right? So B in this little picture kind of represents that idea. So the idea is that a physical property gives rise to a mental property, but the mental property itself doesn't cause anything, right? We might say that all physical properties and physical events have a previous physical cause, right? But what the epiphenomenalist says is that you can never have an arrow going from the M down to a P, right? You can have an arrow going from a P up to an M, right? A physical property giving rise to a mental property, but mental properties themselves don't cause anything. That's epiphenomenalism. And then some property dualists think that mental properties can have an effect on the physical property of the world, right? So that's chart A, right? So sometimes we call this downward causation, right? So we might have an example. You might be in a certain physical state, which makes you hungry, right? And being hungry is a mental state. And then that mental state gives rise to, some new physical event, like you're getting up, going to the pantry to eat some crackers, right? Now, the problem here, at least the challenge for property dualists, is that it seems like neither of these views is very plausible. The thought is, it seems crazy to think that mental properties can never give rise to physical properties, because it does seem like you're thinking about your friend is the reason why you phone them, or you're feeling hungry is the reason why you get up off the couch to go eat some crackers, right? So epiphenomenalism isn't very plausible, but Vaughan points out, well, like, look, isn't it also kind of weird to think about how immaterial reality or immaterial properties are relating to material things? Isn't that just as baffling and strange as Descartes' theory that mental substance can have an effect on physical substances? Why should we think anymore that mental properties can have an effect on physical properties? Let me give you one other example of a non-physical property. We might think about mathematical properties, right? Do you think that the primeness of the number 7, we might think that primeness isn't a physical property of the world? How could the primeness of the number 7 cause anything in the physical world? Could it cause a rainstorm? Or could it cause me to get up out of my chair? It doesn't really seem like it can. So the thought here is maybe it's just as implausible to think that mental properties, thought, if they are utterly distinct from physical properties, could it ever be the case that a mental property could cause a physical change in the world? A problem that we saw for the substance dualist earlier is this thought that there's a causal closure of the physical, that the amount of matter and energy in the universe always stays constant, and that is a coherent view you can take if you say that all physical events have physical causes. But if we think that some mental events are the cause of other physical events, it seems like we'd have a violation of the laws of thermodynamics every time we had a mental event causing a physical event. So it seems like the problem of how the mind and the body interact remains a problem for the property dualist, much in the way that it was a problem for the substance dualist. So that's going to wrap up part 1 for today. Today is a 2-parter. So just to sum up where we've gotten so far, property dualists think that mental properties are non-physical properties arising from, but not reducible to, physical properties. But a problem here is that it's hard for property dualists to answer the question of how physical and mental properties interact. It seems that epiphenomenalism is a strange view, but downward causation, for different reasons, also seems kind of mysterious. So that's going to wrap it up for part 1. In part 2, I'm going to tell you guys about a theory called panpsychism, which might shock or surprise some of you, or maybe for some of you, it might make sense of everything. So keep up the good work, keep working hard, and get ready for the next video as soon as you're ready. Maybe take a quick break, and then let's get into the next one. Keep up the good work.